Previously, police officers were very limited in order to prove guilt. They needed to find physical evidence or a confession. However, with the advent of modern technology, there are now many more grounds for bringing charges, although each piece of evidence must still look convincing in the eyes of the jury. In 2025, 40-year-old Christine Brock and her 45-year-old husband James Brock lived in their home with their children, located on the outskirts of a rural area of the small town of Carrollton, Georgia, USA, with a population of about 25,000 people. By this time, the couple had been together for about 10 years, but they officially married only on December 12, 2023. Before meeting James, the woman had already been married and had a daughter named Sarah. At the time of meeting his future wife, James also had children who lived with his ex-wife. The Brock couple had a daughter together. Christine and James were a decent family, but not everything was perfect. In 2021, the man developed serious health problems, namely his heart. Back in July of that same year, James was hospitalized. During this period, his wife regularly posted on social media, alerting friends and family about the problems her husband was facing. It all ended with him receiving a mechanical pump, a device surgically implanted in the chest to pump blood from the heart throughout the body. James spent almost a day connected to a life support system, but he was soon discharged along with the mechanical device that was supposed to keep him alive. This was a temporary solution, as a heart transplant was required. He was diagnosed with terminal heart failure, which was life-threatening. However, now that the pump was installed, it seemed that the situation had normalized. On July 27, 2021, Christine published photos of herself and her youngest daughter, Jay, who became their only child together. The publication reflected a difficult situation, but was much more positive than the others. 3. The spouses had excellent relationships with all their children, including those from previous marriages several years before the tragedy. The couple had some problems in their relationship, but later they completely overcame this. In 2025, the spouses began to take a more active part in the life of the community and attended a church located in the city of Carrollton. The family was considered cheerful and active, but various rumors circulated about them, especially regarding their abrupt immersion in religion. The Brocks had been indifferent to faith in God for many years. But after the man began to have health problems and a breakdown in the relationship, they immersed themselves in religion and became active parishioners of the church. Despite the misunderstanding of the environment, most accepted their impulse. As a desire to become better, they themselves described this period as a renaissance. They treated the future with great enthusiasm. Christina's daughter from her first marriage, Sarah, lived in the house with her mother and stepfather. In 2025, she was 16 and was expecting. 17 years old, as far as is known, was the period when the biological father received full custody of his daughter, when disagreements began between Christine and her second husband, James. Sarah temporarily moved to live with her father, Donald, but in 2023, the situation improved. She herself expressed a desire to return to her biological mother and stepfather. Everything seemed to be going well until a terrible tragedy occurred. In the early morning of February 20th, 2025, the 911 rescue service received a call from a house on the outskirts of Carrollton. A girl in a state of panic contacted the dispatcher. She stated that her younger sister had just discovered the bodies of her mother and stepfather in the morning without signs of life. The girl who called 911 was named Sarah Grace. Her family was known as decent and hardworking people. They lived here with 2 children. The father and mother devoted all their efforts to raising the younger generation on their feet, so they least of all looked like a couple that could suffer such an unenviable fate. The local community treated them with great respect, so the news of the murder of a man and a woman was devastating for everyone. Forensic experts and detectives arrived at the crime scene. Sarah and her younger sister were waiting for help inside. The 16-year-old girl said that her parents were in the main bedroom. Police found the bodies of 41-year-old Creston and 45-year-old James here. They were lying in their bed covered in blood and had been dead for a long time. About 7 o'clock, both received gunshot wounds to the head, which led to instant death. Judging by the position of the bodies, the victims could not even react to the attack and remained lying in sleeping positions. The activity of employees at the crime scene attracted the attention of neighbors. Soon, people gathered near the Brock family's house, wondering why this harmless family suffered such a cruel fate. Everyone knew them as pleasant, prosperous people who were not involved in criminal schemes. They had no obvious enemies. Everyone was at a loss as to what could have led to the tragic end of this married couple's life. Investigators considered various motives for the attack on the family. The first version was a robbery that went wrong. There were no signs of forced entry on the windows, but traces resembling damage from a crowbar were found on the front door. However, this version was quickly discarded since nothing was stolen from the house. Valuables remained in prominent places, which would inevitably attract the attention of robbers. Even if the thieves were scared off, they could at least have grabbed them in a hurry. At this stage, they discovered one small but important detail. According to Sarah, the front door was not closed at night. This statement seemed unthinkable. The police simply did not believe that in 2025 there were Americans who continue to do so. Trusting other people not to lock their front doors was really about a very close-knit community where everyone knows and communicates. However, no one had heard that here. At least someone did not lock the doors at night. All the neighbors confirmed this in any case. Robbery was ruled out for all reasons. According to Sarah, at the time of the attack, her parents and Sarah, her younger sister, who was barely 5 years old, were in the house. Sarah claimed that she did not hear the sounds of a gunshot, but her younger sister believed that she managed to hear them. At the same time, her older sister had a loud TV, so she decided that it was the source of the sound. The 16-year-old girl continued to insist that she did not hear a single shot. Detectives tried to establish the approximate time of death of the married couple. Then Sarah gave a new clue, according to the girl. She heard an emergency signal from her stepfather's heart pump. Usually, this pump beeped if there were malfunctions. James even believed that it was faulty, but then learned to adjust it so that there was no noise. Investigators decided that the beeping could have started at that moment. When the man's heart stopped, according to Sarah's recollections, it happened between midnight and 1 a.m. She did not get up and check what was happening. As she heard the sound through her sleep, she thought that it was another random malfunction at her stepfather's. In the morning, the girl heard the alarm clock ringing, but also did not respond to it. In any case, the statement that she heard the beeping of the heart pump and did not hear the gunfire, which was several times louder, prompted gloomy thoughts. The criminal could have used special means to muffle the noise of the gunfire, but Sarah's behavior in any case seemed questionable. The family lived in a fairly large house, but not so large that it was possible to miss the moment of the home invasion. The attack and murder of 2 adults with a firearm. After questioning Sarah, the police began talking to the neighbors of the Brock family and looking for sources of information. They were interested in the family living across the street because they had a surveillance camera installed on their door. The neighbors willingly provided access to the recordings, but nothing suspicious could be found in the footage. They checked the video a few hours before the alleged murder, and later investigators hoped to notice the car with the criminals who drove up to the house at night, but were unsuccessful and did not see that someone was leaving the house, but there's quite dense vegetation between the buildings. Therefore, these options could not be completely ruled out. Perhaps the attacker managed to do it unnoticed. The criminals could also have left the car aside, and they could walk to the Brooks house so as not to be seen by anyone. The investigation continued, and the families of both victims were in the greatest mourning. People were worried that the criminal would manage to escape justice, and were also afraid for Sarah and her 5-year-old sister, who could become unwanted witnesses. It was possible that the killers could come back for them. Several days passed. When the forensic examinations of the bodies were completed, a funeral was scheduled. Law enforcement officers were also present at this mourning event to keep an eye on all suspicious visitors. But there were no suspicious strangers at the funeral. Sarah gave a speech, but upon hearing her, the police again noticed the girl's strange behavior. The fact is that her words resembled an apology. In addition, no one saw tears on her face. She seemed too reserved for a teenager of her age who had lost her own mother. She wasn't accused of anything, but they began to closely monitor her. Sarah Grace was an active TikTok user immediately after the funeral. She began visiting the platform even more frequently. Sarah began posting posts in which she talked about how her parents died and how she was suffering without them. She also complained that she no longer had a home because Sarah was a minor. The girl was transferred to the guardianship of her biological father. Her 5-year-old sister began shuttling between members of her mother and stepfather's family. Sarah managed to make several posts, which it was decided to analyze using the experience of a forensic expert. The specialist immediately noticed that Sarah's posts did not resemble the typical behavior of a person who has lost loved ones. Usually, in such cases, children are concerned about their safety, want protection, and want to understand who did this to their family members. However, this situation was completely different. The girl posted viral videos that looked more like an attempt to become famous or to gain support from other social media users. She did not try to attract public attention to the death of her parents, find witnesses, or disseminate this information in order to identify the criminals. All this seemed like a desire to get her share of fame. In the spring, Christine's family offered a $5,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator. But this only yielded a few false leads that distracted detectives after their investigation. Meanwhile, the city police department decided to hold a press conference related to the double murder. Leading investigators spoke at it and told the general public that on the morning of February 20th, 2025, they responded to a call to the family's home in Brock, where they found the bodies of James and Christine in their own bed, both of whom died from gunshot wounds. However, the press conference was not held to tell people about this tragic event. In fact, the police stated that an arrest had been made in this case. Months of work had been conducted during this period. During this period, they checked all possible suspicious people from the couple's inner circle. The first thing they did was exclude Christine's ex-husband. He provided a reliable alibi and willingly cooperated with the investigation. In addition, he had no motive to eliminate his ex-wife and her new husband. No one had heard of cruelty in Christine's previous marriage or disagreements. After the divorce, everything went quite calmly. At the press conference, the police announced that a lot of evidence had been collected against Sarah Grace. It was stated that all of it was digital, but they did not disclose the details. This news was a shock to all local residents. But even after this, few seriously believed that a fragile 16-year-old girl could do something like this. However, investigators analyzed numerous witness statements, assessed the few physical and digital evidence. Dozens of interviews were taken for the investigation, and even FBI agents, profilers, and psychiatrists, as well as several private forensic experts, were involved. According to detectives, the collected evidence pointed to Sarah as the only possible criminal. By the time of the press conference, the investigation was still ongoing, and it was possible that new defendants might appear in all of this. The reason why Sarah, at the tender age of 16, shot her own mother and stepfather was still unknown, but it was already obvious that the public and loved ones would be shocked by this news. Journalists made a major contribution to this, too. In the month leading up to her arrest, the girl gained considerable popularity on social media. Her account was recreated specifically for this purpose, and it worked. In an attempt to gain sympathy and pity from people, she gained many subscribers and a steady stream of traffic to her page. However, considering this as a motive for the double murder seemed unthinkable. It is not surprising that after the press conference, public opinion was divided. Sarah was popular and skillfully portrayed the bitterness of loss. No one wanted to believe in her involvement in the double murder. Nevertheless, there were many gaps in the investigation. For example, the firearm used by the criminal during the attack has still not been found. Where the attacker got it from remains a mystery. Family members of the deceased James claimed that the man had never been interested in such things during his life and did not keep anything in his own home. Sarah could have borrowed the gun from someone and then returned it or handed it over to a third party so that the person could get rid of this valuable evidence. It was possible that she got rid of everything herself, which could explain why more than 7 hours passed between the murders and the statement to the emergency services. She simply used this time to cover her tracks. However, all this also remained in question, since the investigation did not confirm these guesses. Because of this, detectives believed that someone else could have been involved in the murders. There was some kind of accomplice who helped her get rid of the weapon and other evidence. No less indignation was caused by the fact that Sarah allowed her 5-year-old sister to find the bodies of her parents. It was obvious that the child received serious psychological trauma for the rest of her life. Because of this, various assumptions appeared that Sarah herself could suffer from mental problems. However, she did not have any recorded ailments. The press conference was held rather to calm the public, since there were still too many questions left unanswered. Everyone knew Sarah as a sweetheart, a polite, attractive girl who did well in school, had no problems with the law, no documented mental health issues, and no history of running away from home. She never shared her negative feelings toward her family with anyone, if she even had any. No one heard Sarah arguing with anyone, and no one noticed any indication that she would commit a double murder. Students at school described Sarah as a very pleasant girl who was friends with everyone and did not clash with her peers. Her arrest so shocked everyone close to her that even several relatives and family members appeared in the media to express their extreme dissatisfaction with the police's work. Everyone doubted the girl's guilt and believed that detectives had targeted the first person they encountered who was simply in the house at the time of the murder in order to quickly close the case. They believed that the investigation was more a matter of police reputation than justice. Nevertheless, circumstantial evidence against Sarah emerged as events unfolded. On June 3, 2025, Sarah turned to TikTok. A young woman told a Crime Channel host about her family story, but she used questionable language. For example, she claimed that the double murder would be a hit and that people would love the report that could be made about it. Sarah was so inspired by the idea of filming the story and becoming popular that it seemed strange. It sounded cold-blooded and cynical, completely unlike a teenager who had been grieving for months against the backdrop of such questionable behavior. The host contacted the police. She refused to comment on Sarah's story to reporters, but she told detectives everything in detail. Rumors circulated that by describing the tragedy with her family, Sarah had provided the host with some exclusive information. However, the police had very little information about the double murder. Even a thorough search of the family home failed to uncover much evidence. Journalists and concerned internet users also drew attention to this. They considered it impossible that a 16-year-old girl with absolutely no experience in criminal matters could have committed a double murder. Without leaving any clues for the police, it was assumed that she could have used gloves and gotten rid of the clothes in which she shot her family. But how then was she able to leave the house unnoticed to get rid of the evidence and the murder weapon? All the relatives who appeared on television said roughly the same thing. They saw no reason to arrest Sarah. They were confused, while the girl did not give any confessions and swore in her innocence. Sarah contacted relatives from prison several times and asked them to help her get out of this mess. She continued to insist that she had done nothing. Sarah's grandfather was among her closest supporters. He repeatedly contacted her by phone and reacted very painfully to her pleas for help. He described Sarah as a very calm and purposeful girl. At the time of the murder of her relatives, she had graduated from high school and was now planning to go to college. For this, Sarah took 2 part-time jobs at once to save the necessary amount. Despite the support of her granddaughter, even her grandfather found it difficult to explain. How could one not hear shots from a firearm, even with a silencer? The man in the next room could only assume that televisions were on everywhere, so it was possible to confuse real shooting with a TV show or some kind of action movie. The man also did not believe that his granddaughter knew how to use a firearm and was able to shoot at all. The public and the family believed that investigators did not have enough evidence to arrest a minor, while detectives believed that they had at least circumstantial evidence, but sufficient evidence to bring charges. They attributed the dissatisfaction of family members to the fact that they are in denial and will soon accept the fact that an innocent-looking girl could raise a weapon against her parents is something that has truly begun to happen. Public opinion has begun to split. Instead of justifying the girl, some have begun to assume her involvement due to her strange behavior and have begun to look for reasons for her actions that, at first glance, were not observed. Others have constantly looked for a way to insult the family and Sarah herself. Attention was again drawn to the behavior of the arrested girl. Just a few days after the death of her parents, she began uploading videos to her account as if nothing had happened. Soon, Some of them went viral and gained popularity on social media. This could have been the purpose of the crime, which is why Sarah committed the murder. She gained her popularity, although later, her account in TikTok once again. A heated debate ensued as the motive for the attack, prominence and increased attention, seemed too far-fetched. Opponents of this theory argued that Sarah might have used social media not for this purpose, but rather to cope with the grief of loss. After all, everyone experiences tragedies differently. This idea was supported by the girl's loved ones. Sarah actually received support from strangers online, no less than from her own relatives, and this consoled her. Others believe that Sarah's stepfather could have been a rapist or domestic abuser who had terrorized his wife and stepdaughter for many years. It's possible that he had sexually abused her. Given this, the girl could have lost her temper at some point and killed her hated stepfather. But why then kill her mother? However, no evidence of this version was found, and no one ever heard Sarah complain about her family, and she never spoke negatively about her loved ones. Sarah Donnell's biological father, after his daughter's arrest, officially spoke out in her support and declared the girl's innocence. He made a corresponding publication on his personal social media page. For example, on July 16th, the man expressed dissatisfaction with the behavior of the local community, which went behind his back regarding the details of the tragedy. Then, in support of his daughter, he created a public page on a social network dedicated to her fight against the injustice of the authorities. This step was intended to find like-minded people, but negative comments against Sarah quickly began to appear under the posts. On July 19th, on GoFindMe, Donnell posted a request for payment of attorney services for the accused. The goal was to collect $9,000. Donnell spoke extensively with journalists, refuting a whole list of rumors and speculation about his daughter. According to the man, just the day before her arrest, his daughter was summoned to the station to testify because she was a minor. He was present at the interrogation with her. The man stated that Sarah described the chronology of events several times and adhered to one version. She never got confused in her testimony and did not seem to be lying. In his eyes, the daughter did not arouse suspicion, but after 4 hours of communication, when they failed to obtain a confession from a girl, the detectives began to behave more aggressively. They even threw photographs of her murdered mother and stepfather at her. After this, Donnell decided to stop communicating with detectives. When the man left with Sarah, he asked if she would be arrested. The lead investigator answered in the negative, but just a few hours later, the father received a call and was told that Sarah needed to appear at the station again. 10 a.m. the next day. Otherwise, they would send police to the address where she lives. The man believed that they were simply trying to intimidate his daughter and break her. This failed, and no confession was obtained from Sarah. This again gave ground for new guesses. It is curious that immediately after the interrogation, the girl went to Alabama. She wanted to spend time with one of her friends. Sarah willingly accepted the offer to go to the police station again in the morning, claiming that she had nothing to hide or fear, but her departure to another state aroused even more suspicion. Sarah tried to justify communicating with close friends by saying that she received support and that it helped her distract herself from the tragedy, at least for a while. Nevertheless, the detectives thought that the girl should know more than others about her family, but when investigators talked to her about the probable cause of her parents' murder, the only thing that came to mind was problems with illegal substances. The police immediately suspected that she was simply trying to adapt to the most popular rumors that circulated around the tragedy. According to Sarah, a couple of months before her death, her mother and the stepfather got involved with some criminal elements and possibly robbed someone or used illegal drugs and accumulated debts that they could not pay. Naturally, these versions seemed unconvincing to the investigators, since no one close to her believed that this family was connected with substances or any robberies. And due to health problems, the man had been in poor shape for several years. It was unlikely that he could participate in any criminal activities and hardly used anything. Due to the severity of the crime, it was decided to try the girl as an adult. If found guilty, Sarah faces life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The version about Sarah's possible accomplices remains unconfirmed. No additional arrests were made at the preliminary hearings. The lawyer stated that the prosecution has no compelling evidence against 17-year-old Sarah. In particular, no tests were conducted on her hands for traces of gunpowder gases. This, of course, was a fatal error of the investigators. The clothes were later confiscated, but they also turned out to be all clean. She continued to claim that Sarah had managed to get rid of her things in the 7 hours that passed between the time of the murder and her contact with the police. However, no confirmation of this could be found. The prosecutor claims that a wealth of digital evidence has been collected against Sarah that convincingly proves her guilt, but does not specify which one. Sarah was denied bail at the preliminary hearing because the judge decided she was a high risk of flight. Most likely, this decision was influenced by her trip to Alabama. After this stage, the girl's lawyer filed a motion arguing that the judicial publicity surrounding this case was excessive. He insisted that Sarah would not be able to count on a fair and impartial jury in this county. On this basis, the defense requested that the trial be held elsewhere. By December 1, 2025, it was officially confirmed that the judge denied this defense motion because Sarah had received not only censure online and on television, but also support. The trial for the double murder was scheduled for January 5, 2026, and in the meantime, debate continues about how all this might end.